This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be listening. We welcome you back to another edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast. The Vicars Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And my name is Rob Henderson, and I'm the priest at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London, Ontario.
He's also my friend.
He's my friend.
And he's glad to tell people too, so that's very nice. I don't have a lot of those, but that's Robbie, my friend, and my name is Kevin, and I'm a friend of Robbie's. My name is Kevin George.
Friends,
we're friends.
And we have another friend.
And we have another friend.
Hi, my name is Ian. Wow.
Wow. What have I done? Ian's thinking, how did I get hooked up with these guys?
I was so not expecting, he's my friend. I was just not ready for that.
Robbie's my friend.
We're friends.
No,
we're a couple of priests and a music nerd.
That's right. That's right. Coming to a new sitcom near you in the future. I think that's actually a good Netflix show, isn't it?
It
Two
is
priests and a music producer.
I like it.
Meet
I
at
got
bar.
gummies too. You want a gummy? Here, have a gummy.
Oh, nice. Yeah, thanks. I love gummies. Hey guys, today, what an honor and privilege to have our guest with us today. This gentleman is a Canadian hero as far as I'm concerned, and so well known in our country and around the world. Former senator, humanitarian, decorated soldier, author, and Canadian hero, General Roméo Dallaire is in the Vicars Crossing. Wow. We certainly were blessed to be able to connect with him. So
I don't know how you did it, Robbie, but good job.
Well, I actually did nothing you did.
Oh,
so
come on.
You've been up all night with those gummies. That'll get you thinking, should we call Roméo Dallaire's office and see if we can get him? But no, I'm glad you did, and I'm glad we could connect with him. So we'll be bringing him into the Vicars Crossing Zoom room here in just a minute. But before we do that, we want to say thank you to our sponsors, as always, that help us and support us keep our podcast going, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London, Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. And we say hello to Dave Mullen and his entire staff at A. Miller George today.
Hello, Dave. And I want to express our gratitude to Carol Basada over at Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, which is a locally owned, locally operated, locally loved outfit. You don't have to go to the big box grocers sort of /grocer/clothier /druggist. Go to a pharmacist for your pharmacy needs. Someone local and someone kind like Carol. Thank you, Carol, for all you do.
Hi, Carol.
We want to extend that warm thank you to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. And so we want to say many thanks to Trisha Lister for that one, because amazing people over there.
I just wonder if you could roll your chair to the side, because I think you need Molly Maid there.
Don't look behind me.
You're not making reference to the hidden laundry behind me.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not speaking of the basket of laundry.
There's definitely nothing that's in a pile of laundry behind me that no one can see if I just stay in this one spot.
Well, we've been away, as our listeners know, for a few weeks now. We've taken a couple of weeks off, so we're thrilled that we can come back with General Dallaire today. And when we finish the show today, we'll give you a little preview of next week and talk a little bit about what we're going to do next week. Okay. So again, we're glad everybody's here. We don't want the general to be sitting in a waiting room somewhere. So if it's okay, we're going to bring him in right now and start our chat with the general. And we are back here on the Vicars Crossing with General Roméo Dallaire joining us from Quebec. And General, so thrilled and honored to have you here. Welcome to the Vicars Crossing.
Nice opportunity.
Great. And I know you're in Quebec. We wanted to ask how you and your family were doing. We know thinking about everybody across the country in these difficult times. And I know Quebec's had it hard with COVID too, as many other places have. So we hope you're safe and healthy today.
Yes, I'm newly married, and we moved out of city into a very old, it's over 350-year-old village called Saint-Roch-des-Aulnay on the St. Lawrence.
Mm.
So as I look out the front window, I see on top of my Canadian flag that I got on the flagpole, and my mayor is from is a nationalist, so he's got his Quebec flag up.
Oh my gosh.
So I see the St. Lawrence and the Laurentian Mountains in the front, and in the back I see the Appalachian Mountains, and I'm surrounded by huge milk farms. I got about 1,000 cattle around me, so
Wow.
nobody comes and bothers us here, and we're just enjoying a new. It's a new way of life that is so much more sedentary, and a couple of months back, I turned to Marie-Claude and I said, Marie-Claude, I feel we don't see enough of each other because we keep each other busy all the time.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, if you're going to be have to be isolated and segregated, that sounds like a beautiful place to be. So we're glad you're safe and with us. Kevin's going to give more of a formal introduction to our viewers today. Kev.
Yeah, what an honor it is for us to have you with us today, General Dallaire. I'm offering an introduction to someone who really doesn't need any introduction in this country. But General Roméo Dallaire is the founder of the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace, and Security, the global partnership with the mission to end and prevent the recruitment and use of children in violence. You'll find General Dallaire is a celebrated advocate for human rights, especially in regards to child soldiers, veterans, and the prevention of mass atrocities. General Dallaire is also a respected government and UN advisor and former Canadian senator. Throughout his distinguished military career, General Dallaire served in staff training and command positions through North America, Europe, Africa, rising in rank from Army Cadet in 1960 to Lieutenant General in 1998. That's pretty impressive right there. I was in Sea Cadets for a year. But not nearly as impressive.
Sank.
Most notably, of course, General Dallaire was appointed Force Commander of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Rwanda prior to and during the 1994 genocide. General Dallaire provided the United Nations with information about the planned massacre, which ultimately took more than 800,000 lives in less than 100 days. Yet permission to intervene was denied, and the UN withdrew its peacekeeping forces. General Dallaire, along with a small contingent of Ghanaian and Tunisian soldiers and military observers, disobeyed the command to withdraw and remained in Rwanda to fulfill their ethical obligation to protect those who sought refuge with the UN forces. This is a man whose courage and leadership during the mission earned him the Meritorious Service Cross and the United States Legion of Merit, the Aegis Award on Genocide Prevention, and the affection and admiration of people around the globe. And certainly we count all of us here among those as well. An incredible author whose books Shake Hands with the Devil, as well as his book, look at that, where we go, we have a copy right here. There's one over on the desk here. They fight like soldiers, they die like children. And more recently, his book, Waiting for the Light. Yes, did I get that right? I read it last night. Waiting for the First Light.
Yeah.
Yes. And I picked it up last night and read it and couldn't put it down until I got it done. I had read the other two, and I was like, I got to read this book before tomorrow. And it was just beautiful. So whether as a military commander, humanitarian, senator, author, General Dallaire has penetrated the national consciousness of Canada, and he is a celebrated person. He is a true legend in this country. He is somebody for whom I have great admiration, and mostly because of his willingness to be as vulnerable as he's been over these years and open himself up, which is really, to me, a great source of strength. A real strength and power comes from that willingness to be vulnerable. So I was going to read another 4 pages, but I said that's enough. That's enough. Welcome to you, sir.
I'm humbled now. Yes.
You know that guy, right? So listen, let's get started. Just want it to begin really by touching base on, obviously, our stick here on this podcast is around faith in the public square. The story of what you witnessed, General Dallaire, and the genocide in Rwanda is well documented in your book, Shake Hands with the Devil, and the subsequent documentary and film. It's an award-winning book. In your more recent book, Waiting for the First Light, takes the reader through your life since Rwanda and the effects of PTSD and how that affected you and your family. Like I said, we like to focus on that intersection of faith in the public square. One of the places that this becomes evident often is the clash of values when people of faith find themselves, or even raised with faith, find themselves serving in the military, and certainly in theaters of combat. My wife is a chaplain in the reserve in the Navy, and so this is often a conversation we've had about at what point does your faith clash with military sort of protocol and all that. In Shake Hands with the Devil, you write, "I know there is a God because in Rwanda I shook hands with the devil. I have seen him, I have smelled him, and I have touched him. I know the devil exists, and therefore I know there is a God." And when I was reading Waiting for the First Light, I was taken by this passage. "Every fiber of my being, my belief in fairness, goodness, and right action, every value instilled in me by my parents, my community, my religion, my vocation, was under constant assault from all sides, not only from the génocidaires, did I say that right? Génocidaires, who were massacring hundreds of thousands, turning neighborhood against neighbor, and using and abusing women, children, and innocents, but also from the international community. The homicidal hatred from which I and my force could offer little protection was one horrifying form of evil, but no less lethal was the calculated disregard with which the international community responded. It was so clear that the powers to whom I appealed did not believe these Black lives mattered. If they had, they would have intervened. Nothing had prepared me or for my colleagues for a situation that pitted us and all our fundamental values and beliefs against people playing by a totally different set of rules." So with that sort of framework of faith, of religion, of values that what we talk about, can you share a little bit about how those things in your own journey and about those and how you've experienced that in your life, both in your time in the military and also since then? I mean, you describe in detail just what you went through when you came back too in that book about how difficult it was and what you were thrown into and the lack of care that was there, and how long it took for you to get care and so on. So I just wonder if you can share a bit with us about your own values, faith, and how that's intersected with that life.
I think we'll go a little farther than the CNN history, which is last week, and work our way up into this culminating point that I call the moral injury. And the argument that I have been nurturing for years and has become now finally a subject of some very serious research, both at my institute, but also in many significant agencies that are looking at the injuries on the soldiers in particular, but sometimes we're seeing also with first responders, is this moral injury. Now, we stumbled into the 90s with a lot of baggage of the classic use of force in war, the Cold War, big armies and lots of tanks and all that good stuff, where the civilian population was sort of like a sideshow. They'd be refugees, you'd have to coordinate that, but they were not part of the actual battle as such. There were extremes of that when they did bombing of Dresden and things of this nature, but generally speaking, the concept was outside of the realm of professional soldiers and trained armies fighting classic war. And so we stumbled into these imploding nations and failing states in the early 90s. And to discover that you couldn't easily differentiate the good guys from the bad guys. You couldn't really differentiate who were actually those in uniform, military, or whether or not they were civilians. And all the parameters of a visual culture that the military is, particularly, were thrown out of the window, and the classic use of force was absolutely thrown out of the window, because who do you shoot? Who do you use lethal force again? And how do you know you're winning or losing in a civil war? And ultimately, are you doing the appropriate mandate that's been given to you by a UN and an international community that was trying to figure out exactly how to handle these things, because we were so Eurocentric before that. And so we were left with a lot of ethical and moral and legal dilemmas in the field. Although the mandates were clear in words, like establish an atmosphere of security, there was nothing behind it. There was no doctrine, there was no concept of operations, there was no even interfacing of the diplomatic and security and humanitarian concepts behind something like that term. And so we were in the field hoping not to create problems, but also hoping to be useful as the forces that were there were at each other's throat, both civilian and military, in some of the most brutal and the most horrific uses of force that you can imagine, which included rape and included the use of children as weapons of war. So the impact of all that made it difficult for us to comprehend how do you adjust to meet that challenge. And so we came out of that in the 90s injured by the fact that every parameter of our past had been assaulted and abused, but we had been abandoned by any of the structures that we knew of that could help us bring solutions to this. We ended up in the most horrific scenarios of being simply observing this absolutely human destruction that was ongoing, often based on ethnicity and tribalism, religion, but most often is by targeting groups because others wanted to maintain power, like extreme forces and stuff like that. So when I came back with that sort of vacuum that was created, and that nurturing of a sense of guilt of not having been able to influence the situation in an effective way, but on the contrary, had observed it more or not, and having been abandoned in the time of need for at least trying to overwhelm all this by a security force that could impose its will. I spent time with the chaplain general of the forces, and the discussions I was having with him is that we're taking these assaults on those fundamental beliefs of ours, but we don't seem to have anything behind us to be able to handle this. And so, as simplistic maybe that my writings was, when I said that, I knew there was a God because I shook hands with the devil, and I knew that these people had become a personification of the devil. They were not human anymore. That good and bad equation was strong, but it didn't have a reference point in me to know why did God permit this to happen? Why didn't nobody help me? And so for many years, I turned against my church because I felt that we had been abandoned and that the demons had won.
Yeah.
So in this discussion of the spirituality behind our thinking and our professional competencies and so on. I realized that we had no spiritual depth. That be it religious based or be it self-described, there was nothing to turn to strong inside that we could build upon. I mean, the military college where I spent 5 years didn't even have a church. It still doesn't have a formal church.
Yeah.
So we thought we should try to inculcate a new dimension to the officer corps in particular, to help them guide the troops by trying to open up a spiritual dimension communication that would force them to ponder that when these fundamental values, these moral references are under assault, that these ethical and moral dilemmas that you're facing, which don't seem to have any right answer, because of the impacts of what you were taking, that you'd be able to turn to a reference point. And not having that reference point, in my estimation, was a great source of why I was so severely injured psychologically.
Right.
Is that I was just bouncing off rhetoric, and on the contrary, having already turned against my God because of what I had lived, knowing that He was there.
Yes.
But why did it let it happen? Why did the evil win?
Right.
It took years for me to try to build a depth. And the only true answer came a few years ago. And it was in Kansas City when I was speaking at a veterans hospital and a psychiatric hospital. And one of the staff asked me, said, how do families survive with a member of the family that's broken with such profound injuries? It goes to the core. This is not just a trauma of somebody shooting at you. I mean, this is fundamentally profound within the soul of your being. And I blurted out spontaneously, love. And I essentially said, if there's no love in that life, there's no way you're going to survive this. There's no way a family will survive it. And I've reinforced that argument time and time again. And it is the basis of my new life right now with my new wife.
Wow.
Yeah, that's my short answer.
No, that's my short.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible. I mean, it really gets to the heart of the thing, which is that, so many of the world religions certainly talk about love as that sort of overriding principle. And the notion that, we need to have these centers where people's spirit and their spirituality and the affirmation of that which is good is so well grounded for those who are going to find themselves in theaters of abuse, really, where everything that you feel is abused. I was taken in waiting for the first light of an image you painted of your life back in Ottawa when you were up there, of wandering and finding yourself in the church weeping. You write about walking into the church and just sitting there for hours crying. I mean, and I don't think it was sort of John of the Cross, that dark night of the soul, that sort of digging deep into something that's inside of you. Can you say more about that?
Well, it's very interesting you raised that. And it came about just by 98, for about 3 or 4 years after I had been back. Been going pretty hot and heavy at work and so on. I'd been promoted 3-star. We were under massive reductions, a high tempo abuse of troops. There were a lot of problems. And I was the head of personnel for all the forces at the time. And at the same time, I was being called upon to testify at the International Tribunal for Rwanda, which was in Arusha. To an international tribunal, you got to go back to all your notes and everything else, and you got to relive everything that's been there and the people who've been there, what they've done, what they said. And it takes months of preparation on top of your normal work. And the defense lawyers, of course, are there to defend, and so they're looking for holes in everything you're saying. So I was doing, 3 hours of intense work with lawyers, and I went to Madeleine Descartes in Montreal, where my lawyers were very close at hand, with an old big cathedral, and I went there because I was walking and seeking somewhere safe.
Mm.
It was literally, I needed to feel safe because everything that was coming back was haunting me and was making me relive, just like a teleprompter,
Right.
everything. And I couldn't express the angst and the power of the impact of reliving the genocide again. Not only had I relived it for 3 years writing the book, but here I was now actually having to prove that a genocide had happened. And so I had been an altar boy for 6 years, going through all the, from the acolyte and cérémoniaire and surréféraire and all those good things and so on. And so I walked by the cathedral and I walked in. And I couldn't walk in far because I was really at the start of a lot of my questioning of why I'd been abandoned by God. And so I didn't want to go in the front to mass or anything. I sat in the back, hidden in the corner. In these cathedrals, lots of dark corners.
Yeah.
And there was the odor of incense, that's in there. That's and of course all my youth came back and those experiences. And I felt safe to cry. I felt safe to let it out. I must have looked like some old fart there in the corner. Look at that old guy. And I just poured and poured and poured. And what it did was, it gave me a feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. Because the family couldn't understand. You had peer support. I had therapists, they were fiddling with it still because we were embryonic in our skills there. But finally, there was a sense that I wasn't alone. Now that came back and brought me back to the night that in my book, Shake Hands, I described when I was informed that the extremist battalions were coming to wipe out my headquarters, because I had a whole bunch of Tutsi senior people there, and we were going to fight to them, to defend them. And I remember standing at the window and feeling there's no way we're getting out of this, and a certain despondency there. But at the same couple of moments, it was like a breeze that came through the screen, but it was more like a veil, a silk veil. But really, it ended up by being just a sense that something had entered the room. And in nanoseconds, I had turned from that despondency to how I'm going to sort this out and get my headquarters going, and we will do it. I felt a presence. So there is no doubt in my military mind that as much as evil exists, there is good, and that it be expressed as our God from our religion, fine, but that there was a spiritual dimension that had not been tapped into, that was essential to give a certain balance to everything that was hitting me.
Wow. Yeah, both those stories, that one you just told and the one in the church, are to me, as I'm listening to them, both examples of that space you were in where you were alone and then you knew you weren't, and that made all the difference. That you just felt that there was something there that perhaps, amazing and safe. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to ask you another question from Shake Hands, a book that I've really enjoyed. And it's in regard to conflict in the world. which of course continues. And one of the things that conflict effects that conflict seems to have is somewhat of the enraging of people who already feel that they've been dealt an injustice. And you write about that a bit in Shake Hands with the Devil. I wanted to just read a short paragraph of that, where you wrote, "The global village is deteriorating at a rapid pace, and in the children of the world, the result is rage. It is the rage I saw in the eyes of the teenage militiamen in Rwanda. It is the rage I sensed in the hearts of the children of Sierra Leone. It is the rage I felt in crowds of ordinary civilians in Rwanda, and it is the rage that resulted in September 11th. Human beings who have no rights, no security, no future, no hope, no means to survive are a desperate group who will do desperate things to take what they believe they need and what they deserve." So whether it's Boko Haram in Nigeria or ISIS in Syria and Iraq, or even the recruitment of Westerners to join some of these groups, there seems to be so much truth in that. And instead of acknowledging that there's often kind of this mix of tribal and economic and environmental and religious issues involved, these combatants are often portrayed in the news media as, we just call them religious extremists. And so I guess my question is, should we, or how do we as a global community become more focused on some of those root causes, as opposed to just this language of we need to defeat, or we need to claim a victory over these groups? How do we go about that as a global community?
There are two things that, if I may raise. The greatest source of where the rage is in the younger. One would say, no, it's more the adults and maybe the elderly, but there is a certain dimension of balance that adults can do. I mean, their brains are more developed and so on. And yes, there are extremists amongst the adults, of course, but not the general population is not necessarily of that ilk. And if you look at refugee camps and so on, it's not the adults that are going in creating significant problematics. It's the younger people, the under 25s, because their whole being is developing into a human being that seeks to aspirations of better things, of better life, of hope, of serenity, of well-being, of the joys of what life can offer. And they are being curtailed with reckless abandon by the international community and by the leadership of the countries in which they find themselves, or the non-state actors that are using them. So the first thing is that the recognition that the rage and the generational continuum of this rage is in the young people and the under 25s, and they are seeking references that give them hope. And because they're not there, they're creating scenarios that if they don't have hope, then they will counteract. They will react negatively and go into extreme violence. As we're saying, we got nothing against people who are protesting or people who are even radical in their thinking. But when radicalization leads to violence, that's a whole different scenario. And that's and so they don't know how to stop, once they're into that realm. And so how do you curtail the rage of the youth, where in so many populations the under 18s represent nearly 50% of the population to start with?
Wow. And
that they don't see the ability of what even their parents have, which may be not much, but they don't have an education, they don't have a trade, they can't get married because they got no money, the traditions and so on. So there's nothing there. and they've not been to school because the schools have been closed and attacked and so on. So they literally have nothing. So the rage is an automatic reaction that we underestimate its power. And now, with the ability of communications, the ability of transportation, the availability of weapons, and so on, I mean, it's easy to go beyond borders and to conduct the most horrific scenarios. And linking it to a religious reference, I mean, to me, it's no different than linking it to a political reference or to an extremist political perspective. It's but a tool to use that rage that's there. So you got that on one side. On the other side, you've got the same generation, their peers, who are right now in the throes of an extraordinary revolution. This revolution has been caused by the revolution in communications, which is the social networks and the ability of humanity, the whole of humanity, to be able to Skype each other if we want. And soon that will exactly happen. So they are realizing that they're already global, that they can be communicating with anybody. When my son was playing some of these stupid war games that I tried to curtail a bit, you know, he'd be playing with a kid in Moscow and another one in Buenos Aires. To him, they were next door. So to them, this generation, the world is a small little ball. They are global. They're communicating around the world. Environment to them is not a little oil spill here. Environment to them is the big ability of the world to destroy itself, like nuclear weapons, like the heating of the planet. They see environment as the survival of humanity versus what they would like is the thriving of humanity. But they also have extraordinary power in being able to coalesce rapidly and bringing people together and to move people by this still immature system of, and that's why it's still in revolution, of the social medias and the communications tools that exist. So the question then is that what do you do with them on the one side who want to see change and see the elders not being able to move the yardsticks fast enough in the world and not giving them the focus they need. I mean, we spend 600 billion modernizing nuclear weapons, and 12 of them will wipe out the whole of humanity, and there are over 27,000 of them. So this illogic just throws them off completely. So, and on the other hand, we don't spend 600 billion on the environment.
Right.
And so they are going to start becoming real activists, and activists on moving human rights, on moving the equality of humanity, on moving from tolerance to respect, because they will communicate directly with the world. And so I call them the generation without borders. Yeah. They are our best guarantor of counteracting the generational continuum of rage, because it's their peers and they can now communicate with them real time. And so I think there's not just a balance. I think there's going to be an overcoming of the negative by this generation. It's going to just push aside the older generations because it's too slow, don't understand, and this is where we're going. And don't harass me with borders. We are global. We are humanity.
Right. Yeah. There's great hope there, isn't there? In many respects. One of those is in our room today. One of those young people who is experiencing this world without borders is here in our room today. So,
and he's full of rage too. You're full of rage too, aren't you?
Do I look like I'm full of rage? No, I am full of rage. No. Like I just not on the outside.
No, yeah, okay.
But he's reflective. I mean, he's being very, very proper about this, but I mean, he is more than pissed off
Yeah.
with,
Naturally.
with
Yes.
what's out there, with octogenarians fiddling with a future that's right in our face. Because
Mhm.
you know, when I graduated from college, an old colonel said, "Well, what do you think you're going to be doing in your career?" And to me, that meant 20 years down the road as an old colonel, right?
Right, right.
I had 20 years of apprenticeship. These kids, they're lucky if 5 years after what they learned at college is of any use. Their
Mhm.
future is right in their face.
Exactly.
And we haven't adjusted to that. And they haven't also recognized, and some of us are telling them to become activists. I'll tell you without a doubt that it's essential. The last federal election, there were 2.9 million votes between those between the ages of 18 and just over 25 that
Mhm.
were not used.
Wow.
Not used.
Not
Have-
voted. Yeah. Yeah.
If the youth, through the electronic communications, coalesced,
Yeah.
they could create parties, line up against a party, and actually change the face of politics
Yes.
in our democracy in one election. And so when I talk at universities, I tell them, hey, don't tell me you got no power.
That's
Mhm.
right.
You
Yeah.
guys
Yep.
hold the balance
You,
of
you,
power.
you own it.
Use it.
Yep.
Use it.
You own it right now. Yeah, and that's the struggle, is to get that, sometimes that message across, because I have two sons. They're 22 and 24, and right in that age group, and we'll have conversations like that, and oftentimes the sense coming back to me is, well, what am I going to do, right?
Well,
But they,
they sit on their butt and they don't realize
Yeah.
the power
Yeah.
that they possess to do change. And I think I am one of the school that says that we teach them democracy in high school, grade 10, 11. They should be allowed to vote at 16.
Amen.
You teach them it, let them use it.
We give them a car. We give them a car at 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
You have the power of the country at 16 too.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, Ian, go ahead. You had a question. I know
Yeah,
I kind
sorry.
of butted in there on you. Sorry.
That's totally okay. You committed the rest of your life to the prevention of the use of children as weapons of war, which is like fantastic. You founded the Dallaire Institute of Children, Peace, and Security at Dalhousie University, a global partnership committed to ending and preventing the recruitment and use of children in violence worldwide. Brilliant. You saw firsthand just how terrible the use of children for the purposes of war can be. In your book, They Fight Like Soldiers, They Die Like Children, you recount what you witnessed, and I'll just read off a quote here. You say, I saw children soldiers being tended to in their field medical stations, their young bodies ripped apart by fragments of artillery shells. They would die far from home, from family, from the warmth of a last hug or kiss from their parents. Alone and often conscious that they are about to die, some would cry, not in pain, but in sorrow, in loneliness, in despair. Their last conscious thoughts most likely were of loss and abandonment, as their wounds silently stole the life force from their young bodies that had barely started to live. They fought like soldiers, like warriors for a cause they and their families believed in. But in their torn and bloody soldiers' uniforms, they died like children, which is a powerful paragraph. Can you tell us more about the Institute, its mission, and the work that you guys do?
It started with my therapy finally catching on, and this is when I was medically released in 2000. And I had written the book, Shake Hands, and I was offered an opportunity to go to Harvard, to the Kennedy School, and do a fellowship on research. So I wanted to do a fellowship on looking at a complete new generation of conflict and conflict prevention, which the book I'm writing now is finally going to achieve, I hope, at least in saying it. But I got overwhelmed very rapidly by the memories of the killing and the use of young people by state and non-state actors in the genocide, and how they had changed this youth movement of sort of a political group, but the youth movement into an actual militia that was able to slaughter all these people And there was no limit to what they could do, because once they got involved in this and they got caught up into it, the human beings did not remain humans. They became insects, animals, cockroaches, in fact.
Cockroaches, yeah.
And so they lost their sense of humanity, and that is a massive impact on young people whose brains are not developed yet still at that age to recognize the risks and the impacts of such things. They just emotionally get sucked in and do that. So I wrote my research paper there on that. Took a few years of theoretically modeling how in the hell do you stop that, and what is the problem with this new era in which children have become a primary weapon of war in civil wars. Not it's not the little soldier drummer or something like this, you know. I mean, these were the mobilization base of these armies and of these non-state actors. And so I looked at what was being done, and I noticed that everybody was pouring billions into rehabilitating and reintegrating the children that survived being a child soldier. And so, and that's fine. I mean, I've seen them. I was in the Civil War in 2001 in Sierra Leone, where it's all child soldiers. I saw them working in the field and so on, the NGOs and so on, to try to help. And there was re-recruitment of them because a experienced child soldier was a worthwhile asset. And so children being moved illegally was part of it. But essentially what came to the fore is that a lot of the kids that were recruited never made it to the rehabilitation. They were slaughtered, they were killed, they were dumped in the bush when they're injured, and there was nothing for them. And the scale of use of children over the years was not being reduced by the fact that you were doing rehabilitation, reintegration. You were just picking up the pieces afterwards. And so how do you stop a weapon system for being effective in conflict, in combat? And so I did a soldier's analysis of it, and I said, well, one of the first things is you got to cut off the source of this weapon system. You know, if it's a tank or so on, you don't provide spare parts or the whatever, ammunition and so on. You don't build them. And then once they're being used, well, how do you make them ineffective without simply destroying them? Because if it's a weapon system, what do? You destroy them. And all our doctrines were saying that they're treated as combatants, and so lethal force was being used against them. And that's when I said the aim has got to be to find ways to prevent them from being recruited in the first place by far new doctrinal, tactical use of force with the NGOs, integral with the NGOs, with the nation builders, to prevent them from being rendered vulnerable for recruitment. And secondly, if they're recruited, to re-educate the militaries and police forces that face them to use other means than simply treating them as combatants, and minimize the casualties on them. But there was another angle to it that I had to find, that I found out when I was doing this research, was the fact of the impact that these children were having on our soldiers also. When you're facing child soldiers not being trained, it catches you by surprise, and there have been numerous ambushes and scenarios where the soldiers have not responded to the ambush, and we've taken casualties physical because the children simply caught them by surprise. The other side of it is that, what about killing a child? Think of it.
Yeah.
Just think that you're killing a 12-year-old.
Wow.
And you're looking at that, I had a sergeant meet with me once in Quebec City in a shopping center and talking a bit. And when I asked him what his job was in the battalion, he completely broke down.
Wow.
And when I finally was able to stabilize him a bit, he said, General, he said, I've been back from Afghanistan at the time for about 5 years, and I still have not hugged my children. Because his job was in a reconnaissance platoon to take out the suicide bombers before they hit the convoys of humanitarian aid or whatever. And those who he was taking out were 12-year-old girls who were strapped full of bombs.
Wow.
Or a 14-year-old who was pregnant, or a child that was obviously mentally affected, and so on. And that not only, yes, it was legal, the rules of engagement and so on, and protecting, the soldiers and the civilians and the people and so on, but none of that could override the fact that you had killed a child.
Yeah.
And that's where the moral dilemmas come in.
Right.
And that's where it eats away at you, and the shame of actually saying. And I have been in ambushes and been involved.
Yeah.
And all that came roaring back during my research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
When I killed a child.
it's hard to get your head around. Like,
just
talk about a
the window
moral
just
injury.
listening to it.
Yeah, talk about a moral injury, right?
There's a no win. Right? There's
Yeah.
just no win.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, you get your own people killed, and
Right.
you're not being responsible. If you do it, you're doing the right thing, but
Yes.
morally, it is so viciously corrupt that it just it cannot be rectified. And so some of us live with that. And in the book that you, I forget your first name.
Ian down there.
Hi.
In the book of Child Soldiers, it only around chapter 8 do you probably all of a sudden find out that the child soldier that was killed by the peacekeeper was a girl.
Yeah.
Wow.
40% of them plus are girls.
Yeah.
Wow.
They have been abused. And so the soldier, when he goes by that child that he's just shot because he's moving to protect others, and she grabs his pant leg, and he looks down, and he sees the person who had been firing an AK-47 at him.
Yeah.
And God knows how he survived. They're not very good shots, but still, the volume of that person was determined to kill him.
Yeah.
And now he's looking down, and he realizes that child, that soldier there, has all of a sudden in nanoseconds turned back into a child.
Yeah.
And that child is crying, and that child is dying.
Right.
And he killed her.
Yeah. Heartbreaking.
Oh, it's powerful.
It's heartbreaking stuff.
Yep.
Now, thinking about child soldiers, Omar Khadr.
Yes.
You have said by every definition, Omar Khadr has to be considered a child soldier. Yet Canada, who was one of the drafters and signatories of the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, an instrument to protect such children from persecution and guarantee that they should be put through a formal process of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, kept Omar Khadr in illegal jail in Guantanamo where he was kept there by the Americans, where really Canada didn't do much to lift a finger to get him out of there. He was the first person since World War II to be prosecuted in a military commission for war crimes committed while he was still a minor. You were a senator during that time, and you petitioned the Harper government, which really had very little interest in Omar Khadr beyond keeping him where he was, at least in my opinion. But you petitioned him to have him returned. Eventually that happened. And in 2015, he was released on bail. His sentence was completed in March of 2019, and the government of Canada, quite big in the news, settled a lawsuit which he had brought against the government, agreeing to apologize and pay him $10.5 million for damages in 2017. And yet, even though our government has now formally apologized and paid, just a mention of his name still is a bit of a lightning rod. Yet still, even though this was a child taken from Canada, a kid born in Toronto, a Canadian citizen, taken over to Afghanistan, that seems to set people into a rage. I mean, it seems as though people forget that this is a child and one of our own. When his name comes up, when you hear people who are particularly on the right side of the political equation in this country. Can you share with us your feelings about Omar Carter and just what all that was like when you were in Ottawa and the efforts and even your own reflection on why is it that we still have this in this country? We still have this ignorance about the child soldier issue. I mean, to me, it's an obvious thing.
It's interesting that throughout all that, the country was split damn near down the middle.
Yeah.
Between him being a child soldier or a terrorist.
Yeah.
And let me make it quite clear. He was a child soldier indoctrinated by his parents and put into a conflict zone in which he was given the use of weapons and so on, and in so doing part of a force that was facing another force. Mm-hmm. It is interesting that child soldiers were being used in so many other conflicts at the same time, but because they weren't killing white people,
right,
it went nowhere. And us killing child soldiers went nowhere, mm-hmm. right? Because they're black or whatever, Afghani, and so the hypocrisy of our societies in regards to human life, human beings all being equal, mm-hmm. is a fundamental premise right there that has been sinned against. Yeah. The second thing is that there was a lot of political capital to be made by unscrupulous and manipulative political leadership elites, both in Canada and the United States, to use the word terrorist, even though in a number of cases with the Taliban and so on, they were a fighting force. Yeah. And so by putting that mantra on him, that immediately took everybody into a position of debate. Not only did he kill, allegedly kill, but he was in a when you see the description of the battle there.
Yes.
In fact, he got shot in the back twice, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But when you see the battle itself, you realize that he was a fighter, but the desire to impose new laws on us post 9/11 and sustain them by governments that found it valuable to them to curtail our civil liberties, to curtail our human rights, by imposing the Patriot Act and certain cases and stuff like that. Omar Carter was a perfect tool for them to do that. And so I, without my own political elite, simply say that the political elite of Canada that started even before the Omar Carter, the Conservative government, was so wrapped up in the panic of terrorism that it lost its true sense of equilibrium. And in the case of the Harper government, it was only too happy to use that as an instrument. and as a voice of the possibility of terrorism in our own country. And that's why we're going to continue to put more restrictions on our civil liberties and so on, because even our youth could be recruited, as many were. And now some of them who want to come back, having been sucked in by the social media on the negative side into fighting for ISIS, they want to come back now. People are scared to let them come in. It is interesting, however, that Australia and the UK, who had child soldiers there in Guantanamo, they repatriated theirs. And they put them through what we had through the optional protocol created, a non-punitive judicial process, sort of like in Quebec they have for juveniles and so on. And they did it, but Canada didn't.
No.
Now, why didn't Canada do it? Well, it's quite simple. None of the political elites of our country had the guts to want to see a trial like that happen.
Right.
Even if we had everything prepared for his rehabilitation and so on, and separated from his family and all the good things, they just didn't want to see that happen. They didn't know how it would turn out. They would also find out that there would have been torture on him and abuse of him, and so they would be held accountable for it. And so the only reason he made it back is because the Americans got so pissed off with the Canadians, who were under Obama and so on changing, that they threw him out. And so he arrived on a Saturday morning at 4:00 in the morning, hidden, hidden from the. And my last point is that, he was paid 10 million or so on. I had him in Dalhousie in an open forum, this first open forum at Dalhousie with me and with Emmanuel Jal and a couple other ex-child soldiers on a forum that we do every year last year. And he spoke for the first time, and he was magnificent, and he's been very thankful. But we spent 10 million in sort of rehabilitation for him and so on, and he's physically injured still in the eyes and so on. We nearly spent 100 million keeping him in that jail.
Wow.
Amazing.
I don't remember any of the politicians.
No, or the public.
That was not an outcry, was it?
or the public who like to create these false dichotomies and say, well, they gave 10.5 million to Qatar. Where's the money for our homeless vets? Well, these two things are not connected. But what about the 100 million to keep them in Guantanamo? That's incredible.
So when you when the media play the populist side, they don't go to the content. They go to the margins. What hits people in the extreme, and so Kenny, the premier of Alberta, was an MP at the time, and so he and I argued in public, and it's on CBC tapes about Omar Khadr, and I treated him as an idiot because that's what he was. Quite honest, what I'm seeing in
Alberta. Well, I was going to say, it continues.
He's confirmed his idiocy.
General, you've been so gracious with your time this morning. If I could, just one more quick question here as we wrap things up. I wanted to point to a quote from your latest book, Waiting for the First Light. Which, by the way, I must say, for two priests who are in the season of Advent with our communities and getting ready for the first light of Christmas morning, it's the perfect title for this.
Perfect title. It really is.
So, Waiting for the First Light, you consider the question of why, and you write this: over the years, I've returned time and time again to the question why. Why do we offer ourselves for military service? Why do we fight in the first place and then continue to fight this injury? Why have I never let Rwanda fade? And why do I continue to fight for veterans, for children, for human rights? Why don't we just turn our backs on the needy as so many others do? The only answer I've been able to muster is one that I saw profoundly illustrated time and time again in Rwanda. It is simply who we are. So you suggest that the answer was displayed in an episode in Rwanda. Can you share a little bit about what that is about?
The patrol had gone through the village and the village had been slaughtered. And as they're sort of taking stock and so on, at the other end of the village, there was what we were calling rape sites. What they would do is they would use rape as this were not just rogue soldiers, they would use even prisoners of their own side to infect women, to rape them, mutilate them. And that creates horror, and that horror creates fear. And that fear then breaks down the society's ability to coordinate, and so you can manipulate populations massively by keeping them under fear like that. And so the patrol at the other end of the village came on a site where there was a number of girls and women, few boys, who had been raped and mutilated, abused, and killed, but there were a few still alive. Barely, bleeding profusely and so on. And so the young lieutenant had to take a decision. Does he order his soldiers to help these people, these few women and girls that were left alive, although they didn't have any medical supplies or anything really, provide them some solace as they are, in their dying moments in such suffering and all the humiliation they went through and everything else? Or does he order his soldiers not to go in to help? Because there is over 30% of HIV/AIDS already in the country, and bloodletting would only make it worse. So when I found out about that patrol, I asked the 26 contingents who had a few troops, their commanders, what would their platoon commander order? Would he order to go in and risk them catching HIV/AIDS, or not do anything? They're going to die anyways and carry on. 23 out of the 26 countries said their platoon commander would order the troops to keep on going. 3 countries said they'd jump in. And so the problem is that the patrol was a Canadian patrol. And the young lieutenant who turned around to give the order to the soldiers to jump in to help was too late. These young 18, 19, 20-year-olds on their own jumped in and were providing whatever they could to bring a bit of solace and a bit of dignity to what had happened to these people. And they did that instinctively. Mm-hmm. That is the nature of this country, is we do it instinctively. Military, NGOs, diplomats, even tourists, we do it because there is a fundamental belief that all humans are human, and that we're all equal, and that you just do not leave a human being in suffering. What makes me a little sad is that we could be leading in the world in helping hundreds of thousands in not suffering like that if we took a leadership role as the leading middle power that we are. Mm-hmm. And we're not doing that. And I think we're going to be held accountable in history for being a country with so much, when so many people want us, and we are refusing to provide when we know we can.
Yeah.
Well, General, like I say, you've been so gracious with your time today. We are so humbled that you said even yes that you would join us. We were shocked. We said, "Oh my gosh, we're getting Roméo Dallaire to come on the Vicars Crossing." Yeah. So we want to just thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your time, for your service, for all that you've contributed over your career. It's been wonderful to have you here.
But Rob, you realize that now this big bio of his, he'll be able to put. I was a guest on the Vicars Crossing too, right? Like that's.
There we go. There we go.
Of course, we have an extraordinary chaplain general now, Guy Chapdelaine, who is by far the most magnificent leader in spirituality and that we could imagine at this time, and he encourages me enormously in being present with us. And I wish to thank you for listening to me. And as just a little comment, waiting for first light is a very military term, because historically troops couldn't fight much at night. So there would always be attack at dawn. So you would always be waiting for first light. And so it is very nice to see it used as part of the Advent. I like that angle. Thank you very much.
Keep
Very
alert.
good.
Keep alert.
Keep alert, keep awake. Yeah, there is light. There is light to come.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again, General, and we wish you and your family a Merry Christmas and health and safety and a prosperous New Year. Okay, God bless you.
Same thing. And the
Thank you
best
so
to
much.
young Ian too there.
Thank you so much.
Thank
So,
you.
Ian, get off your butt and be an activist.
Yes, Ian.
I'm always I'm there. I'm with you. I'm doing everything I can.
All the best then.
Thank you
Great.
so
Okay.
much.
Wow, what a treat that was, guys.
Incredible. Incredible.
Powerful. Took my breath away a couple of times. Some of the things that he was talking about today, and a real eye opener. And I loved what he said to Ian. That Ian's got so much power. You have
That's right.
power, son.
You have the power, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I know you're in tune to those things that quite, as he said, should be pissing you off. You
They
made
are.
mention of it before about environment and
Yeah.
and how we're
Yeah.
taking care of the most vulnerable. And
My friends and I are very pissed, to put
Yeah.
it bluntly,
Yeah,
about a lot of
yeah.
these things. So yeah,
as
it's
you
nice to
should
see
be.
that someone else is understanding that.
Yeah. Well,
Someone else
man,
who isn't our generation is understanding that.
well, yeah, a man in his 70s who's seen some stuff.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is the global nature of that that sort of young angst and frustration, right? And so some folks who've, like, we talk about the climate in a very privileged way, but if you're living in some of the worst parts of the world, climate change is not only just a neat conversation, it's a life or death for many of them,
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
again, thanks to General Dallaire for his time, and certainly want to encourage folks to read those books. This is the one that I think most people know about, Shake Hands with the Devil. If you haven't read it yet, certainly one that you want to get a hold of. And the latest one that Kevin was making mention to, Waiting for the First Light, that you read yesterday. There it is.
Yeah.
And so yeah, definitely those would be great. Those would be great Christmas gifts.
Yeah.
So there you go. All right. I want to say thanks to our sponsors again before we head out of here, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated, to Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved, and to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. So guys, we got one more episode next week. We're going to be welcoming in Andrea Proctor to the Vicars Crossing, and we'll chat with her, and then we're going to be taking a bit of a break until the new year, until we start. I guess it will be now our 4th season coming up.
Yep.
Wow, big.
Wow.
Imagine how we got. Imagine how we got there.
I know. Who would have thought, when we were just upstairs in that little room?
Yeah, I know.
With
drinking
three of us,
beer.
Yeah, drinking beer. 3 of us just chatting with each other, and here we are. So we'll look forward to talking to Andrea next week. And also we'll be spending some time with each other, reflecting on some of our favorite episodes from
Been a big year.
From the 3rd season.
Huge year.
So we hope you can be part of that. And I've already got a couple in my mind I want to reflect on. So we'll chat again next week with that. Okay.
Good stuff.
So guys, have a good week. Be safe out there wherever you are, and safety to all of our listeners. Wear your masks, wash your hands, keep away from each other. And
Wear your seatbelt.
we'll get through this. Wear your seatbelt. And Kevin, remember, Kevin. Do I have to remind you again?
Remind me.
Always look both ways
Before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vicars Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vicars Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!